In our last few lessons, we'll work on a small project. We'll have our ship fly off into the distance after it has refueled. So let's get started. As we animate this flight sequence, we'll learn some cool animation tips and techniques along the way. We'll add a camera animation. We'll also learn how to animate between IK and FK modes as we have our fueling lines separate. And one of the first techniques we'll learn is how to stop a cycle at a certain point in order to have the animation change course. So this animation here is the same cycle that we worked on in a previous lesson. Now what we'll do at this point, before we get started with any of that, is check our preferences. Again, that can be accessed a few ways. We can get to our animation preferences directly by using this icon right next to the auto key button, or we know we can access this same dialog window from Window, Settings and Preferences, and we'll find it right at the top. Alright, so heading over to Settings, we'll just make sure we're set to 24 frames per second. We should already be, but just double checking. Then under Animation, we'll set our tangent types to Plateau. Find this to be easier to manage in the graph editor. So we'll go ahead and work with these tangent types. And next, under the time slider, again, we're just checking to make sure our playback speed is set to 24 frames. And we can now save this out. We'll make sure our auto key is enabled. We'll also change our end time to 200. And now we're ready to bring back our platform and move our ship in place. So let's go ahead and grab its group. And in the x-axis, the translate x, that will be negative 671.202. And the y-axis, 278.108. And then in the z-axis, we'll have that set to 164.912. All right, so what I'd also like to do is add some spinning to our turbine fan so it appears as if this ship is actually hovering. So we'll set the speed to its highest amount of 5. So when we hit play, now it looks as if we're in flight. So that's nice. Going back to the animation control, let's head to our graph editor. So we're ready to work on stopping the cycle. Let's go ahead and have it go for one more loop. So we'll have it stop at frame 121. That will save us some time. That's exactly why we're doing this. Okay, so to get started, under View, I'll go ahead and make sure we're viewing our infinite curve. And now with the ship node selected, so we are affecting all of our function curves, let's head over to Curves and turn off our pre-infinity cycle by choosing Constant. Next, we'll need to bake out our cycled animation to convert the cycle into keyframes. So again, with the ship selected, let's now head back over to Curves and choose the Bake Channel tool. Going to our options, we will reset our settings. And what we'll do is go ahead and set this to start and end. Now, keep in mind that these options are grayed out if we have keyframes selected. So let's make sure that we have nothing selected when we do this. So now the start of our bake will be at the very end of our animation, frame 61. So I'll set the start time to that frame. And now the end will be, again, one more loop. So that's 121. And watch this, when we choose Apply, you can see that Maya has generated keyframes so that in the end we have converted a cycled function curve into a real one, which is great. However, there are so many keys to clean up, so we either have to go through, select them, and delete them to optimize this, or we can use a better setting. So let's go ahead and undo back a few times to before this was applied. And what we'll do is use Sparse Curve Bake. That way, Maya, when we hit Apply, will preserve the function curve as best as it can while giving us as few keys as possible. Great, so that's much better. And at this point, again, with our ship selected, we can turn off our cycle. Now, keep in mind, I have a key selected on the rotate Z, so when I go ahead and apply post infinity constant, it's going to only apply it to that selected keyframe. That's why we just want to double check and make sure that we have nothing selected except for our main ship node at the top. And now when we go back and apply constant, happens to the entire function curve. Alright, so let's go ahead and take a look at this. If we were to close out our settings here, I'll minimize the graph editor, you can see now the animation is going to stop after 121, and we can also see our extra keyframes. Great. So that saves us some time animating the start of the sequence. So now we can go ahead and focus on the end. So what I'd like to do is work on this layer by layer, and that we focus on the main movements, and then we can add subtleties afterwards. By the time we get to our last lesson, we'll add a few more changes where we kind of have the gun move, and we'll also have our thrusters move as well. We can call that our final polish pass, but right now we're just focusing on the ship's movements. So let's go to our move tool, and on about frame, let's say 147, we can go ahead and translate our ship back for some anticipation before it flies forward. Not much at all. If we bring it back too far, it'll look cartoony when it flies forward. So we're going for more realism here. So I just want it to translate back just slightly, just enough where it's noticeable. Great. And now we can have it press forward to the very end. So this is where it's going to accelerate and fly off into the distance. So on frame 200, let's go ahead and really have it translate forward. Okay. Now as we start to back up our camera, you can see that eventually our objects disappear. That's because of our clipping plane on the camera. So when we go ahead and select the camera from the view menu, we can now head over to our attribute editor, and let's see, scrolling down, this is going to be underneath our camera attributes drop down. We'll go to the very bottom where we see the far clipping plane, and let's go ahead and add a few more zeros in here. So right now it's set to about 10,000. Let's go ahead and increase that. Much better. Alright, so now we can keep track of the animation. Let's go ahead and see what happens when we hit play. What should happen is by the time we get to frame 200, you'll see the ship kind of slow down. That's what we don't want. We want it to accelerate. So, in order to get what we need, we know we need to work with the graph editor. So let's go back, and we'll focus on our translate Z. Let's go ahead and frame it. And here's why it slows down. You can see we have this flat tangency on 200. So our ship will accelerate, but then you can see how the value will change and start to slow until we get to our last key. So in order to fix this, it's very simple. It's just a matter of grabbing our start tangent on the left side, and now we can go ahead and start to bring this down. Now you'll see a difference. As we hit play, you'll see that the ship accelerates. Beautiful. Now you could also see that our tangent is kind of broken here. Sometimes it happens with plateau keys, nothing to worry about. With the key selected, we can flatten it out using this tool here, flat tangents, and then we can go ahead and drag it down again, and we no longer have that issue. So that happens at times with end keys, where there are no other keys that follow. But it's very simple to adjust, so no worries. Alright, so now that we've added this, let's go ahead and continue working on the translate Z. What I'd like to do is add a bit more of a cushion in the anticipation before it pulls forward. We'll grab our key on 147, let's go ahead and frame it, and then we'll use our interactive zooming, holding down Alt and Shift to zoom in closer. So it's a combination of just kind of panning and then using the zoom tool. We could also zoom it out to stretch it horizontally, so we have a nice detailed view at this point. We'll grab our out tangent and let's start to drag this up to cushion this, to smooth it out a little bit more. It was a bit too sharp before. So now what we'll see is some smoother anticipation before the ship flies forward. Great. Alright, so this is looking nice. So what I'd like to do from here is actually work on some rotation in the z-axis. Let's go ahead and have the ship roll at the very end of the animation. So going to frame 200, I'll go ahead and close out the graph editor, head back over to the channel box. We'll go to our z-axis. Let's have it roll over to our left. So the ship's right. So here's what we get. It's starting to roll as it undocks. However, I'd like to have it roll a bit later. So it's almost as if the pilot is flying forward and then he's ready to change directions. Alright, so on frame 180, what we'll do is drag the ship down to straighten it out a bit. Not completely, because that would look very linear if the ship was pointed straight forward. So we'll just bring it down just a little bit here. So now the ship will start to roll after that point. And now we can move back to our graph editor to start to fix this up a bit. So let's go ahead and focus on our rotation Z, frame this up. We can see that we can smooth out the key a little bit more on 180. Let's grab our out tangent and start to drag this up a bit to get a smoother roll. Great. And then we can add some rotation Z movement at the beginning during the anticipation. Again, just so this looks more natural, on around frame 138, we can go there and rotate the ship slightly over to its right, our left. And then we can have it rotate back a few frames after that. Let's say on about frame 160, just slightly. Not much at all. Alright, beautiful. So we have some nice subtle rotation here that adds a bit more of a polished feel. Great, so we're just about finished. So at this point what I'd like to do is work on our translate Y, the up and down axis, because right now it looks like the ship just kind of stops in the up and down axis, almost as if it reaches a floor. So we need to fix that. What we'll do here is decide when we'd like the ship to fall as it separates from the fueling line. So I'd like that to happen around frame 1, let's say 150 or so, just so that the motion doesn't happen too fast where it looks snappy. We need to consider the ship's weight. But also would like to not have the ship go down all of the way, because that would lead to a constant rhythm that would be a bit distracting. We kind of want to break up our rhythm at times in order to add more appeal. If you'd like to, again, learn more about that, feel free to take a look at our 12 Principles series and also character interaction in Maya. Alright, so what I'll now do is head over to frame 117. We'll select our function curve and use the Insert Key tool to place a key right there, again, just before our ship comes down to a stop on 121. And now going to our Move tool, we'll grab the key on 121. And let's go ahead and shift it down to a point where we'd like the ship to translate down more after it separates. I'll hold down Shift and drag with the middle mouse button, and that will lock our movement horizontally as we drag left and right. And we can do the same thing vertically to change the value. Again, hold down Shift and start to drag up and down. So it's just a way of helping us to avoid making changes we don't want. So I'll start to drag this key, let's say to about frame 157 or 156, just somewhere around here. 156 I think will work just fine. So at this point I'll also just drag the key down more. And let's go ahead and see if we like the timing here. We'll hit play. Okay, so you can see how the ship kind of like falls and then translates forward. But I think that's a little bit too slow. So let's go ahead and speed that up a bit. Instead of 156, let's go ahead and bring this about 9 frames forward to about 147. Let's go ahead and see how this fall looks. Alright, I kind of like how it falls a little bit faster. Great, so at this point, again, so it doesn't look like it flies off in just a linear line, we'll have it translate upward on about 161, and we're offsetting this from our other keys so it doesn't feel so robotic. We don't want things happening at the same time. Okay, great. And then when we get to our last frame, frame 200, we can go ahead and translate the ship up a little bit more in the y-axis. Here's what we end up with when we hit play. Alright, great. So, that basically finishes up our animation here. You can experiment and add more rotation if you like, but I think this is going to work just fine. Great stuff. Alright, well at this point, we'll stop the lesson, and the next lesson will work on animating the fueling line.